Hi, my name is Daniel Will Harris, and we're here today on books, which is partially because it's about books and partially because I'm sitting on books. But that's neither here nor there. I'm here to interview author Christopher Meeks about his new book, The Middle-Aged Man and the Sea. I've known Christopher a long time. We met working at the most successful self-publisher in the pre-digital age. It was Peter McWilliams at Prelude Press, and Chris went on to publish many of his stories in national literary magazines, and he was one of the first creative writing teachers at Cal Arts. And now he's come out with this new book of short stories. Hi, Chris.
Hey, this is your idea, so I love it.
What inspired you to put your stories together into a book?
I wrote plays for a while, and between those big projects, which would take up to a year, I would write short fiction. And in 1997, I started thinking, let's get them out there. You get rejected a lot as a writer, and I was persistent, and I've found a number of journals that published it. And when I had enough together, I put them into a volume. Actually, I was trying to get them through a traditional route when it was you who said, why don't we try going self-publishing. And
you've been so successful, you've now been reviewed by the LA Times.
Yeah.
And got a great review there. So, you know, you're doing it yourself has allowed you to do it your way, and it's being very well received.
Yeah, I think Daniel and I met at Prelude Press, and because we worked for a publisher and learned obsession there, knew what a good book looked like, how to design it. Well, you learned how to design it. And I learned to just get it right, just focus on it. I also learned thanks to my son watching the TV show The Apprentice, that marketing is a lot, and marketing research. So Daniel actually had come up with 5 different covers, which I tested out on people, and we tried different titles. So The Middle-Aged Man and the Sea was probably the last one I thought would work, and people loved it. And marketing to me is just offering it to people. It still counts what do they get when they get the book. So being obsessed helped.
But you're very disciplined in everything you do. I mean, you were disciplined in your approach to putting together the book and marketing it. And I know you're disciplined in your writing. Why don't you tell me what your writing schedule is like?
Well, I used to wake up every morning at 5 before my son got up at 7, so I'd have 2 hours. Doing it, the first few weeks seemed like the stupidest thing in the world to do. I mean, who gets up at 5 to write? And who am I writing for? I mean, that was a thing, but it was something that I learned that if I did it 2 hours a day, I produced a lot. And now that my son is in college, I still get up very early and write. I find that if you sit at your desk, you're into the moment and you create.
Well, how did you start writing?
Actually, I didn't intend to be a writer. In college, I was going for both film and psychology. I was interested in both. And I took poetry writing to fulfill an English requirement, and found people loved what I did. When I came to LA in 77, I was shooting a movie in 35 millimeter with my roommate, and things didn't work well. The fire department shut us down. My life savings was gone. And I thought, I want to create where I don't need a permit. And so I focused on writing full-time then. And I've just kept looking for ways how to do it.
What inspired the stories in this book?
The stories have all been inspired on things that have happened to me. This isn't a memoir. This is fiction. And yet, I believe, like, Well, one of my favorite books is by Tim O'Brien, The Things They Carried About Vietnam. In there, he talks about there is a certain deeper truth you can get at if you're not telling the way things really happened. And I've come to believe that you can be much more vulnerable getting at your emotional truth than telling the events the way they happened. And as a writer, the more I've written, I've realized to become more transparent with my emotions and dive in to that. And these stories are telling emotional truths in my life. The cover story happens to be based on my brother, late brother-in-law who died from cancer at age 40. And yet when he told me that, he still felt perfectly fine.
It's a very moving story because he's kind of matter-of-fact about it.
Yeah.
He's very calm and everyone else is upset.
I did that in first person, but it's not me per se. There are things about that character that are not me, but it still allowed me to dive into my feelings and how to deal with someone who knew he was dying. And what's that feel like?
So you were able to be more honest with your own emotions because you put yourself into a character rather than making it yourself.
Absolutely. And it allowed me to find the humor in the situation too. I believe that my favorite stories I've come to see that there's drama and humor. And that was the thing I was fighting against actually when I was first publishing. My humor came out naturally. You wouldn't maybe know it from this interview, but I would have to edit out my humor, sort of like Woody Allen would do in some of his early films. Yeah. And I finally realized, no, the humor has a lot of truth in it. And so I've allowed that to stay
But see,
in.
that's one of the problems when you work with traditional editors. They think something has to be either one way or the other way. They don't always understand. There's room for both in one story. And having that contrast can make each stronger. It can make the drama stronger and the humor stronger.
Yeah, which is life, no? I mean,
right.
Now that we've gotten older since we've met and realized there is a finite time about our lives here, why wait around? Put it in your stories. Anyway, that's my approach.
Well, and that's what you've done. That's what you've done with the book too. You haven't waited around. You've put out the book and you've gotten well reviewed, and you're very happy with it. And you're working on another one, aren't you?
Yeah, actually, it's a novel. It happens to be called "The Laughter and Sadness of Sex," based on my year abroad in college to Denmark. I mentioned to someone that I went to Denmark to live with this Danish woman I met. And when I got there, she was living with some other guy. And she said, wouldn't that be a funny story? It's not the story of a guy in college, but of a 35-year-old physicist who gets tenure at the University of Wisconsin. And now that he has tenure, he decides he's going to find a wife. And he's going to use the scientific method to find one. Outside the scientific method, he happens to step on a Danish woman's toes, which brings him to Denmark. He's doing physics in Denmark and still...
And that book's a very good example of how you can be very dramatic and very funny at the same time. And also the amount of research that you did is really impressive.
And I loved discovering what it is to be a physicist. I think that's one thing we get to do in writing is be other people. You started as an actor, and you probably got onto this much earlier than I did, but it's wonderful to walk in other people's shoes and see through other eyes.
Well, and not only to do that, when you do that, you kind of lose yourself in the process, which is a wonderful thing to do now and then, to let go of yourself completely, kind of forget who you are.
And I get to do that in front of a blank screen with no one around. I get to do it in silence, and yet doing something like this, I'm in front of everybody.
And now also publishing it yourself, you've been able to hear from a lot of your readers.
Actually, that's been the best thing about doing this as a book versus when they were in literary magazines. In literary magazines, maybe 1 or 2 letters to the editor was the response. in a book form. People are finding my email address, finding my website, www.chrismeeks.com, and I'm hearing from people, and people are being touched. In some ways, I don't even know how to react. I'm just so taken that they've felt things I've felt, seen things I've seen.
So what would you do differently next time?
The main thing I would do differently is we're still connected to the real publishing world. And you have to start marketing long before your book comes out. I only started doing it 2 months before the book came out. And you really need 3 months minimum. One publicist told me recently 6 months. And so that urge to just get it out there needs to be delayed. Set the stage. Let people know your book's coming.
Well, this is a good book, and you should pick it up and read it. The Middle-Aged Man in the Sea by author Christopher Meeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for thinking this up.